Do you own an E39?
Or perhaps you own an E46? The valve cover gasket's been leaking along the back here. All this oil that's been leaking is coming from the oil filter housing gasket. But you can actually now start to see the level of condensation inside the breather. So don't forget to take the bung off the old one and put it onto the new one. And now we're ready to install this. Good after Morgan and welcome back to the channel. Why do I like to do preventative maintenance on my BMWs? It's precisely at times like this. It's a beautiful day, but it's -5. So let's see what happens when we do a cold start on our 530, which we've been maintaining all year. And the preference obviously is to work on it while the weather's good. Nice and crispy. Let's get her defrosted. I'm gonna let it run and get it up to temperature. And that's precisely why we like to do preventative maintenance, so that when you come out to the car in conditions like these, it's ready to go. So now the rest of the episode's going to show what we did earlier this year, this summer, and you guys can enjoy the rest of part 2 when we did all the work. And this is the pay dirt. The harness, it ends up on this plug, so it looks like this is a pretty easy harness to replace. A standalone sub harness. We lived to fight another day. In the bin. So here's the old sub harness, and here's the replacement one that came in 24 hours after I ordered it. The connectors are identical. They have the same part number. The only thing is missing seems to be this label, but maybe I can transfer that over. So let's have a look at the loom. Exactly the same plugs. The wiring is almost the same. The only difference is the original one had a red with a white stripe. This one is just red. But when we look at the 9-pin connector, both of them are exactly the same connector. And let's trace the colours. The first row we have black with blue stripe, black with green stripe, and black with purple. And we have black, blue, black, green, black, purple. Then the middle row, only the first 2 are used, so it's 2 browns. And then on the third row we have black with white stripe, black with red, black with yellow, black with white, black with red, black with yellow. I'll take the top cover off the replacement one and have a look at the inside and make sure this capacitor, resistor, whatever it is intact on the replacement one. On the replacement one, it is actually cracked, and it looks like it's cracked in the same places as the original, but at least it's still intact. I think overall the replacement one does look better. I might put some insulation tape over that crack just to prevent any further damage. It certainly looks better than the one I fandangled. But now you guys know what not to do. I've probably spent far too much time on this. At least now it has some kind of insulation over those cracks. And that'll do. So just another piece of information. The seller actually removed it from a E39 M52 engine, but I've checked the entirety and it's exactly the same as the one that's on my M54. Find out something quite interesting. And so whenever I was comparing the old harness, there was some extra plastic conduit attached. When you look at the one that I've just received, it doesn't have this extra conduit. I didn't really pay much attention to it. And when I remove this, quite brittle, so it must have been on there for a while. Ooh, that doesn't look OEM. One of the main coil pack wires was actually broken through, and one of the earth wires was kind of wrapped. The original harness was already damaged. So what's underneath door number 4? If you're still with me at this stage, thanks for your patience. Look at that, looks like a mouse has been in there. What a quality repair. All the wires underneath have also been somewhat damaged. Can you imagine what might have happened if that had earthed against that? There would have been a nice short circuit and at least a misfire. So there's a while you're in there that I didn't even know that I was doing. Result. That's how it should look. Here's our lovely replacement harness. What we need to do now is feed the main connectors back into the ECU box. That went underneath. That's the new harness back in. Now with the coil pack harness back into the ECU box, we're going to have a closer look. And here's the little clip that holds the cable glands in place to stop any moisture. We can now bring the coil pack harness back over, and looking at the way this moves, it might indicate why the old one had a big cut in it here. I suspect maybe somebody had accidentally put the HVAC cover on top or something while this was temporarily out of the way. Slide these connectors in first. So that's what the earth post should eventually look like. One on the coil pack on that side and the other one on the back side. That's more or less the valve cover gasket now complete. I've left the oil cap on upside down just to remind me that there's no oil in the engine yet, so before we even think about doing anything else, let's get her topped off with oil. We're going to move on to the differences between the 330 M54 valve cover gasket and the 530, which we've already done in this episode. Difference between the 530 and the 330 in this case are the coils. These are push-in coils instead of the bolt-in ones. Simple as that. The harness is more or less the same. You remember the mistake we made on the 530, so let's remove this quite gingerly and make sure we don't make the same mistake twice. We're in good shape. So that's what's supposed to happen with the earth connector. 8mm screw, earth lead pops off and the 10mm gets left behind. But from now on, we're identical process to the 530. Here's what an intact original harness should look like. Look after your harness. Now, let's see if I can do this without getting oil all over the place. Oh, nope, I can't. Fuck me. So, my favourite German word is verschlimmbessern, which basically means making something worse while attempting to fix it. Try that again, that's better. The only reason I'm doing this, so the oil dipstick hole is a little bit lubricated, so I can start to pre-lubricate the oil dipstick tube before putting the oil ring. Oh, oil ring? Yes, oil ring. And here's the oil ring, O-ring, dipstick. If we do a little comparison between old and new, at least we know why we're doing this. Now it's a dipstick oil ring. O-ring, oil ring, stick it up your whole ring. It's better, in my experience, to put it on here first, pass the dipstick into the hole, and before pressing down, basically start pushing this O-ring and try and get it seated before pushing this entire dipstick home. So let's see if I learned anything. The important thing is that the shoulder that's on the dipstick oil tube should not be visible. So I'm just using a plastic trim tool to help push that O-ring into its slot. It's not that this job is difficult, but it's definitely tricky. If you don't do this, you'll get vacuum leaks, potential idle problems. I think that's it. So let me bring you down to have a look. You can't see the O-ring because it should be pressed home. That shoulder is below the top of the hole on the sump. Ta-da! The O-ring is even around the shoulder. So now we can put the mounting screw back in, and you know if the bracket's in the right place because you can screw the bolt in by hand. And then don't forget about the return pipe from the CCV system, which I did forget about because it should really go behind that bracket, and then it just slips on to the oil return pipe on the dipstick tube. A bit of lube always solves every problem. Just a little bit. I just need to push the pipe home, and there we go. And there's the oil return pipe onto the dipstick tube. So that's the oil dipstick completely refitted and cleaned up, and also the O-ring is completely invisible. And the wrapping still goes on. Looky what we have here. But at least this one's not cracked like the one that's on my car. I've already got a new one of these. Well, looks like it's been glued into place. I don't need that, but I do want to keep this. Let's give it a cook wash. One there. This one's missing. It's also the most easily accessible one. So if I ever manage to buy another or find another one of these, it's a 2-second job to fit it. Looks a bit better after a wee wash. And L-ring for me is as close to original as you can get. The BMW one was rather expensive though, so. Okay. Finally get some oil in this poor thing. So I guess we don't need these anymore. Well, I would never make any money as a mechanic, so I just went and washed these. I don't know why. What's wrong with me? Anyway, that'll do. I've already taken off the O-ring, and then just for some lube, and that's the oil of my choice. into the sump. Number 1. So 6 litres, we're about halfway up the mark. Not quite half a litre, about 400 mils. There we go, we're right on the top there. It's not the full mark, the full mark's actually up here. I got a delivery of paper. You might wonder why I just bought a new dipstick. You'll see in a minute. It's something to do with this end of the old one. Well, now I know why I had to pay so much in postage. So what I noticed was while I was changing the O-rings, that the plastic on the dipstick had actually started to crack. So there's a crack just there, and this piece fell out, but thankfully into my hand and not into the engine sump. So I'm going to change the dipstick out, but thankfully these O-rings, which were brand new, they can just go straight onto my 330. So I'll change the O-rings on the 330 with the ones that were intended for the 530. That's one nice benefit of driving 2 different cars with practically the same engine. I would say that's pretty much exactly what it needs to be. Put a dab of oil around the O-rings, just so that they don't tear. Now, installation complete. Time to clean the DISA flap. Now this O-ring's already been replaced, but I found that the O-ring was a little too big. I managed to find an orange nitron. The orange actually has a special material which actually fits better. I'll put the link in the description where I got that. Just quick going over with some throttle body cleaner. You can see I've already serviced this DISA as well. It's the aluminium rebuild kit. It still works fine. Again, just a little dab of silicone. Not very much. Okay, let's get the DISA flap back in the car. That's where the silicone really helps. Electrical connector. There we go. DISA reconnected. Well, these covers won't help the engine run any better, but it makes you feel good. Noise for noise, or for In today's standards, that's not much of an engine cover. I think today's engines you wouldn't see anything. Nice. So you can see the bottom rail of the radiator. This left corner kind of straight, but as you get towards the middle and then to the right, it's no longer straight. Luckily for me, I caught it before anything happened on the road. It's only a matter of time before this radiator burst its banks. If you're a regular viewer of my channel, you'll have heard me say the words, while you're in there. We're about to replace a radiator, which was already a while you're in there job, and to do that we obviously have to disconnect several pipes and drain the coolant. That's how to do it. That's the radiator bung quarter turn anti-clockwise, and then it just pulls out. Oh, my bucket is leaking. We've already taken the belts off. While we're in here, we might as well replace the water pump, this tensioner, the deflection pulley, the tensioner for the AC compressor. So we've got pretty good, not bad, bloody terrible. We might as well replace all three. So let's see what the parts man has brought. We've got a new coolant expansion tank, radiator hoses, new tensioner for the alternator and water pump, tensioner for the AC compressor, the water pump, the idler pulley for deflection pulley, cap and bolt for the deflection pulley, naturally belts, radiator cap, O-ring for the temperature sensor, and the bleed screw. So let's get the cooling system refreshed. There we go, just a little bit of corrosion back here, so I'll clean that up. When I grab the spindle, I don't know if you can hear that, there's a tiny click, so it looks like the bearing's definitely not new. 4 nuts. We'll take this water pump out. Now when we take the water pump out, there's probably still quite a lot of coolant left in the block. I put my broken bucket down underneath. It's broken, but still good enough to stop the entire garage getting flooded. So now we have the 4 nuts off. We pulled 4 bolts off the pulley. Just grab 2 of them and thread them into those 2 holes. Use the bolt as a kind of press tool, and as you thread the bolt in, it'll push against the block and force the water pump to come out. And I think they will go almost the whole way in before they'll touch the block. Just moving them by hand, you can actually see here the water pump is starting to separate from the block. I don't want to go too tight in case I damage the surface or any part of the engine block, so let's see. There we go. So you can see those bolts, they were coming out. You can actually see the 2 marks on the engine block. That's where they push against. This is labelled BMW. INA is also the manufacturer of the BMW part. INA is what I bought. And this is the composite impeller. So I think originally they weren't. They were made from plastic. It's still in pretty good condition, to be honest. The bearing's not making any noise. The O-ring looks good. It doesn't look like it was leaking. I think it was €27 for a new one. Doesn't make any sense not to replace it.
And of course, we can't forget about the 330, but you'll be glad to know the water pump removal is exactly the same.
There we go. The removal of the expansion tank. Top pipe, it's connected to the radiator and the expansion tank, so it does have to come off. There we go. Just I've missed the bucket again. Just need a little bit of persuasion because these two pipes have to come out simultaneously. They were fighting each other. Try and get that radiator coolant shaken out before we proceed. We already changed the radiator on the E46, and this is the same bare unit that will also fit to the E39. This one's around 5 years old and it's holding up well. On my E46 there is no deflection pulley installed as standard, as opposed to the E39, which has a deflection pulley located here. But everything else between the E46 and the E39 is more or less the same. And this time we're going to disconnect the two pipes at the bottom of the coolant expansion tank. This tank is actually full. Let's just try and catch as much of the coolant as we can. One's out. Most of it in the bucket. This is now empty. There we go, new water pump. And now we can pull this pipe. Let's see how much coolant comes out. 0. That's the coolant temperature sensor, and you can't buy that O-ring separately, but it's actually the same as the air intake temperature sensor, so I'll put the part number in the description, but I'm going to change that out. Okay, now we can move on to removing the top radiator pipe. And we're replacing this as well. Because why not, and yeah. There we go. I've actually replaced this thermostat housing quite recently, so that's staying. So now let's get this broken radiator removed. Come out. There we go. This radiator has been in there for quite some time, but we definitely need to give this a clean. And the floor is getting the brunt of it all again. I'll put a piece of cardboard against these coolers so I don't damage them. And now we have a bit more room and we can do the tensioners. I'd rather do that before putting the new radiator in. You don't need to take the radiator out to do the tensioners. Plugged up all the open water ports, so I'm going to try and use compressed air to clean out the back side of the cooling system. So yeah, I just dropped the GoPro. Nice. Let's try that again. Now let's start getting the pulleys changed out. This is the deflection pulley. It matches up with a notch on the alternator. This is also the bolt that secures the alternator. It's fairly long. And now we can take this tensioner off. There's two bolts. Here's the AC pulley. There's one screw here, and the other screw is obscured by the pulley itself. We'll be able to use a breaker bar to move this, and then this hole, I'm just going to use a nail. When this rotates around, you'll see a corresponding boss lining up, and we'll just put that in there, and that will hold that in place while we unscrew the other screw. So let's get that done. And that nail just holds the tension on the spring and allows you to access both screw positions. Shiny new flexion pulley. Don't forget about the notch. Goes into the alternator. Now these will get tightened with a ratchet once the belt's fitted, because it'll stop the pulley turning. I also have the tool, but that seems too complicated. So we just need to remove these. They need to go onto the new radiator. 2 rubber mounts. It's probably the original radiator. It's a bare radiator, and it has the classic BMW logo. Here we also have a bare radiator with the same part number, but the somehow the BMW logo is scratched off. And it's the same on the other side. Here we have the bare manufacturer name and their part number with the BMW logo scratched off. You can save a lot of money buying OEM parts just without the BMW badge. The only thing we have to do is transfer the rubber blocks from the old radiator to the new one, and they can only go, thankfully, in one direction. Now we can slide this into the engine bay. Ta-da! And that looks somewhat better than the one that we took out. Thankfully, the remaining parts that are left to be fitted is getting ever smaller, but there's always time for new parts deliveries. Let's see what we got. BMW coolant hoses. We also got a new coolant temperature sensor and coolant level sensor. That, in theory, is now the last set of parts we need to fit to get this job done. Hurrah! Here we go again with the BMW part numbering system. Part numbers, BMW logo. This is the coolant expansion tank that we just took off. And here we have the Male premium line from Bear, actually, that is listed as an aftermarket part. Now when you look closely, you can see usual story. So same part number. This one's from 2021, this one's from 2001. So it's the original coolant expansion tank. It's 22 years old, so let's change it out for a 2-year-old one. Technically brand new, but you can see what they do. Scratch the BMW part number off. Everything else exactly the same. The coolant overflow pipe. Don't forget to tighten the hose clamp. Feed the other hose clamp on this end beforehand. It has to go through this gap in the fan shroud onto the coolant expansion tank, which sits here. So those two hoses will clip in there, and then that will feed under there, and that hose will be fitted on there. Now most people I've seen on YouTube that fit this, it's just bing bash bosh, but for me it's these details that I'm always looking for. I need to just attach this coolant hose to the expansion tank. There's this clamp here and this clamp here, and once that's done this should go down quite easily. So let's get those attached, and then we can connect this coolant expansion hose onto the expansion tank. Okay. And the whole time trying to leave yourself enough room to be able to turn the fan anti-clockwise. The fan is on about one thread, so we can connect the top hose back onto the radiator. Let's feed it onto the expansion tank. And I apologise to you all, I'm sure it's quite boring. Okay, what we have just in there, we have the clamp, and then the hose runs this channel of the radiator, goes on here, and then I can tighten this clamp. Coolant hose should fit into the channel. When I push the rest of the shroud back on, it doesn't interfere with the shroud. You can see this little feature here is for that purpose. Little rubber strip that slots in the fan shroud. Now the fan shroud is fully home. Clips are in. The bleed screw, but we're going to leave it partially open, and the other bleed screw on the top radiator hose is already partially open. I'll be able to fit the fan from underneath. You can easily spin the fan on. Because of the reverse thread, it will self-tighten once it starts running. Here's the old coolant expansion tank. The only thing we need is this bracket. And what we're going to do is attach the coolant tank to the bracket first and then mount everything in one go. We're replacing everything with genuine BMW. That locks it in place. Install this entire piece onto the radiator and then attach the coolant connections. A little bit of Tetris. Pass this through underneath the power steering pipe outlet. And now we can start to reconnect the water hoses. This one goes on to the back of the expansion tank. Snap the clip. And that's the top hose now connected.
And there's no separate coolant overflow pipe on the E46 because it's taken care of with this extra port on the top hose.
The shroud slides. Just the air intake to refit now, and then we're ready to start. And then after the shroud is properly fitted, we just have to route the rest of the coolant pipes. These are actually part of the heating system. And this motor is not fitted to every E39, but this is a second pump to help spread the coolant around the heating system. And they feed into the bottom of the coolant expansion tank, so you can see one inlet, one outlet. Hopefully that's a reasonable explanation of how to fit this thing, because it's a lot harder than some people make it look, to be quite honest. This motor sits within this rubber vibration mount. Get it to slide in. Then we know that should clip in there. So that looks good. That needs to go under. The pipe with the motor, it's running to the outside of the expansion tank. There we go. I love the sound of that click. So that's the layout of the HVAC system pipes off the car and how it attaches then to the overall cooling system of the engine. What did I call that? Second water pump. This is a secondary pump to boost the water pressure through the heating system. And with that now attached, we should be good to go. So now our remaining part count looks a lot better. Then some coolant and some distilled water, get the radiator bled. Let's start filling up the cooling system, and I'm going to put 1.5 litre of coolant in and then fill this up with distilled water and then put 1.5 litre of that in, and then we'll be pretty sure of a ratio of 1:1. So let's now see if we have any coolant leaks. Slurpy slurpy. So the water's going somewhere. The expansion bottle is connected to this secondary water pump, and then I'll just run the pump a few times, then start the engine. I just got a warning on the dashboard asking me to check coolant level, obviously in German. Kühlwasserstand prüfen. Ignition on again. Now we have air-free coolant coming out. So let's just nip that up just by hand. And bear in mind I haven't actually started the engine yet. So we're just trying to get some of this coolant through the system before we start the engine. Now this bleed screw is starting to bubble. So I'm going to turn off the ignition again. And we should see some bubbles coming out of that bleed screw. go. You can actually see coolant is now running through the top breather hose back into the reservoir. There will probably still be air in the system, but at least now I have coolant running through the entire radiator. That little pump. And now we have a steady stream of coolant coming from the breather hose. That boost pump definitely helped us out here. We better not forget about the air intake. At least we don't have to replace anything there because I just replaced the air filter. So let's get that reinstalled. But here we go with the very first start since we did all this work. No air in there. Looks like air-free coolant. That looks good. It might be 9 degrees outside, but definitely is not 9 degrees in here. All we have to do now is go and test drive. Oh, and get it off the ramp. I don't know what else there is to do, but I'm sure I'll think of something. This is how it looks when both of your daily drivers are in for repair. We have to depend solely on the E39. Subscribe to the channel and there will be lots of episodes out on these two as well.